Ngā mihi o te wā. In today's headlines, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment says the regulations governing fracking are light-handed and confusing. Dr. Jan Wright is finalising her report and says while there's nothing so far that shows the practice is unsafe, it's not clear where accountability lies.
When you get this complexity and fragmentation, you can get a risk of things falling between the cracks, excuse the pun. There is a lack of strategic oversight.
Dr. Wright believes as long as fracking is properly regulated, there is currently nothing to warrant banning the practice. And Minister of Energy Phil Heatley is promising any gaps identified by the Commissioner will be addressed.
If there are any holes, then we need to fill those holes, and that's what I'll be working at. We're already looking at a whole bunch of regulation around the oil and gas industry, and I'm sure that a lot of those new moves will give her those assurances.
New health and safety rules are to be applied to the oil and gas industry. Acting Minister of Labour, Chris Finlayson, has announced the changes today to bring New Zealand's regulatory standards into line with Australia and the UK. Operators will face increased health and safety planning obligations and more incident reporting of narrow misses. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters has revealed he's known about allegations against his MP Brendan Horan for 2 months. Mr. Horan's brother claims he misappropriated money from his late mother's bank account, and Mr. Peters says he's told Mr. Horan to resolve it.
His number one priority is to sort this matter out and get the facts before me, because after all, that's something on which a future decision is going to be based. This is a priority matter and it's urgent.
The Maori Council has been in the Wellington High Court today trying to block the sale of Mighty River Power until all water rights issues are resolved. Crown lawyers maintain that the ownership of the company is irrelevant as the Resource Management Act will be used to protect Maori rights. But the Maori Council's lawyer says if the Crown can't provide restitution to Maori mana, then it must commercially compensate iwi. Justice Young has asked for specific examples of what ownership interests mean, saying the time for general rhetoric has passed. A campaign to lift the entry-level wage is being launched at Parliament today. The Same Work, Same Pay campaigners say the government's starting out wage for 16 to 19-year-olds is unfair and won't solve the problem of youth unemployment. To Egypt, opponents and supporters of President Mohamed Morsi are staging mass rival demonstrations. Opposition activists continue to camp out in Cairo's Tahrir Square after the president's declaration last week, granting himself sweeping powers above the judiciary. The Muslim Brotherhood is justifying the decree as a necessary interim measure to override obstacles to a new parliament. The president is meeting with the Supreme Judicial Council as judges try to persuade him to limit his powers, and Mr. Morsi is reportedly very optimistic about reaching an agreement. And even as the Egyptian president grapples with his country's constitutional crisis, there's now pressure on him to monitor the Gaza Strip situation. Life in Israel and Gaza is returning to normal, although rebuilding is expected to be more difficult for Gaza. An Israeli blockade designed to prevent arms smuggling also hinders trade and supplies. Egypt, with a growing reputation as a Middle East peace broker, is being called on to ensure Hamas and other militants can't replenish missile stocks by smuggling in Iranian weapons. American and European authorities have seized 132 websites in a transatlantic law enforcement crackdown on online sellers of counterfeit merchandise. The seizure was the latest in a string of efforts by US officials to shut down online forgers, but the first joint effort with EU officials. And finally, Wellington is bustling with Hobbit royalty. The author's great-grandson is here ahead of tomorrow's premiere. Royden Tolkien flew in with actors at around midday on Air New Zealand's Middle-earth Boeing 777, and they were welcomed by Sir Peter Jackson and other cast members. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says moves to sweeten the Hobbit deal were worth it. While the Labour Party still questions the tax and labour law incentives to entice filmmakers here, John Key says the Hobbit will have a kickback for New Zealand. But Mr. Key says those breaks are probably as far as it will go.
You can always have a race to the biggest incentive, but actually we've got to back ourselves on the quality of people we have, the flexibility of our crews, the nature of our scenery, and the capacity for us to produce world-class movies.
Ka nui ngā karere mātua mai I te whare kōrero o rima, mori ora.